guys, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about contemporary techniques. I'm gonna finally continue this series that I started years ago. In this one, I wanted to talk about tongue ram, which is something that people have asked me to talk about for a very long time now. I have made the Contemporary Techniques 101, which is the flutist side of things. So I'll link that video in the description and in the cards. So this is going to be for composers. For those of you who are new to my channel and have not seen these series, I have two. There's Contemporary Techniques 101, which is more the flute side of things. How do you practice it? How do you learn how to do these things? And then I also have Contemporary Techniques for Composers, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's more about the application of these techniques in music, the difficulties of them, and the things that you might not know if you aren't a professional flutist or don't have access to a professional flutist. So yeah. Tongue ram is a really awesome technique. A lot of people really love it. I know a lot of flutists have a lot of fun playing it, and it has such a unique sound that really doesn't exist in any other instrument that I understand why composers love it. However, there are some difficulties to it, and there are some things that make it not the most intuitive to write for. The first being the setup time that it takes. I know if you've seen my series on contemporary music and contemporary flute, you know what I'm talking about, but I just want to reiterate that, and also for the new people here. Just as a physical example, I'm just going to show you. You can see, particularly coming out of it and back into sound, there is a delay. There's a little bit of a less of a delay going from sound to tongue ram, but either way, you can see that it's a physical ask. So how do you get around that? The best way is to give the flutist setup time, give a quarter note rest, an eighth note rest, some kind of rest, so that they can stop their tone, even clip the last note a little bit depending on what the phrase is, and set up the tongue ram so it can be as loud and as full and as good as you want it to be. Also, coming out of a tongue ram section, make sure that you're giving them time to set back up. And actually probably more time, as you just heard me do. The going from tongue ram to pitch is actually slower because you're resetting a lot of things, whereas when you're coming from tone to into tongue ram, you're only resetting a couple. I don't know exactly how much time to tell you. I don't think there's a set thing, but I'd say minimum eighth rest is a pretty safe bet. And if you are okay with a little bit more time, just be clear about that. If you need things very in rhythm, obviously please dictate the rhythm that you want it to be in. Just know that there is delay and that you do have to account for that. Along with that, there's also a physical limit on how fast these sounds can go. Because of the way that the technique is produced. It's not like double tonguing or traditional sounds with articulation where we can use backward strokes. It's more like slap tongue where like at some point there's only so fast your tongue can move. It's actually a little bit slower than slap tongue because it requires that puff of air every time, whereas slap tongue is just a tongue motion. So again, this is true for all flutists. Everyone has a different max velocity. If you're writing for a specific person, always ask. That's a thing I talk about all the time. And if you're writing this in theory, err on the side of slower. And if the person who ends up premiering the piece says that they can go faster, then awesome. Then you can adjust. But I think this is something to be consulted with a flutist, or be consulting with a flutist for. Just because it is so personal and it is so difficult to say, like, I can do it at this many clicks per second. Like, I don't know the context, if it's the same note over and over again. Like, there's so many different variables with speed that it's better to just ask the player. Just for reference. That's my, like, solid speed. I can probably do 10 or 15 of those in a row. Also keeping in mind that the more of these that you put in a row, the less good they're going to be, the less effective they're going to be, because you get tired, the air doesn't work as well. It's a stamina thing as well. Along with that, know that this is a technique that does take some refining. So if you're working with a younger flutist or someone who isn't as contemporary focused as, say, myself or some of the other amazing contemporary flutists in the world, you might get someone who isn't as good at this sound, who gets more of the whiffs that you can get. Like with that air sound at the beginning, that, where it's not, the thunk doesn't happen right on the downbeat, right when you're starting. Because what we're going for is that, like the sound comes immediately. However, that's something that takes practice. So be aware of the experience level of the player that you're working with, if you are, again, working with a specific player. And if you're not, just know that if you end up working with a less experienced player who doesn't know how to do this technique as well, they will not be as successful as quickly, and you might get some sounds that you aren't super happy with. This is true for a lot of the contemporary techniques. They have a learning curve. They're new sounds that we're learning as we're going a lot of the time, and so sometimes people who are a little bit less comfortable with it will have more problems, and that makes sense. It's just something that I like to make people aware of, that like this isn't a normal ask, or it isn't as comfortable of an ask as, say, like flutter tongue is, or some of the techniques like key clicks and even slap tongue, though I think that one's probably erring on the side of more like contemporary focused players. There are more pieces in the contemporary repertoire that have made it into the standard flute repertoire that have those kinds of sounds than necessarily tongue ram. So it's kind of considered an advanced technique. Although, what are these words anymore? So yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. Know that you might not get the best sounds in the world, but if you're okay with that, then cool. Just make an active decision. The next thing is they don't really have a dynamic range. This is true of a lot of the percussive techniques that I talk about. They're kind of all or nothing. There is some dynamic difference that can be made based on how low they are, because the tube will resonate louder, but there really isn't much we can do on our end to make them louder or softer, except kind of exactly what I was talking about earlier with the whiff, or like having the actual attack of the tongue ram a little bit later. That can sometimes make it a little bit softer. A practiced performer can actually kind of aim those downbeats so that they are whiffing where they're supposed to be, but it's not a super controllable technique. And then final thing is, this is another one of these techniques where octave matters. Nothing in the second octave is going to speak properly. It's going to go into the lower octave and speak the whatever it is, seventh lower that tongue ram speaks. And then the high range just doesn't sound very good. Some of the lower third octave ones work, but once you get above like E6, it just doesn't sound very good anymore. And you get that kind of hollow sound, which if you're going for, cool, that's fine, but know, again, that you're going for that. So yeah, that's kind of my rundown of tongue ram for composers. I hope this was helpful. If you guys have a specific technique that you want me to talk about on the flute side or on the composer side, please let me know, as always. And as always, if you like this video, please give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe, and I will see you guys next week.